The signs were ready, lying by the front door. I spent most of the last 2 days on them, wanting them to be perfect. Now came the hard part. I trudged up the stairs to the master bedroom, tore off the sheets and half carried the mattress down the stairs, through the hallway, and out the front door onto the lawn, just off the street. I returned to the house, grabbed the bedding, and threw it down the stairs, adding it to the pile next to the mattress. I glanced at the clock, 4:22. I had to hurry. I needed everything done by 5 o'clock. Next, I disassembled the bed frame and hauled it outside in parts, reassembling it on the lawn by 4:35. The kitchen table was light enough to carry, so I turned it sideways and maneuvered it out the door, placing it beside the bed. The last item was a 6x8 rug from the living room, which I rolled up and set next to the other items in the yard. Setting up the signs took a bit of time, but by 4:55, everything was in place. I had 10 minutes left before Emily returned. I walked out into the middle of the street and surveyed my work. It looked so perfect, almost bringing tears to my eyes. Our bed, the kitchen table, and the rug, 3 places I knew for sure where Emily and her lover had been intimate over the past 6 months. The signs were placed high enough to be out of reach, each one detailing the betrayal. A large sign in front of the furniture read, "These items are yours for free. They are no longer needed in this house. If you can stomach the stench of deceit and broken vows, help yourself." The sign above the bed read, "On this bed, my wife has repeatedly broken her vows and destroyed our marriage by being unfaithful for the past 6 months. Today was their last encounter." Above the kitchen table, a sign proclaimed, "Here, my wife and her lover often entertain themselves, usually just hours before serving me dinner." The sign above the rug simply read, "My wife and her lover have defiled this home. Take these items if you dare." Each sign included a 17x24 photograph of the adulterous couple, caught in the act on the corresponding piece of furniture. At 4:57, I noticed neighbors gathering, curious about my display. Some cars stopped, and a few people were on their phones, either calling friends to come see or alerting the authorities. I waved casually to the crowd and re-entered the house, closing the door behind me. At exactly 5:05, I saw Emily's car turn the corner and slow down as she saw the commotion on our lawn. Emily's car crawled up the street, confusion and apprehension visible even from a distance. As she approached our house, her face contorted into a mask of disbelief and horror. The signs, the furniture, the photographs, everything was laid bare for the world to see. I stood behind the front window, watching her reaction unfold like a slow-motion disaster. She parked the car, her movements mechanical, as if on autopilot. Stepping out, she barely glanced at the growing crowd of neighbors and onlookers who whispered and pointed. Her focus was entirely on the spectacle laid out before her. She walked up to the bed, the kitchen table, and the rug, reading each sign with a growing sense of dread. Her eyes darted to the photographs, and I could see the moment her heart shattered. Through the car window, I heard her scream, "No! Oh God, no!" The sound was primal, a mix of agony and disbelief. Finally, her gaze shifted to the front window of the house. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide with shock, and tears streamed down her cheeks. She seemed to be asking, why? The same question had plagued me for weeks. I turned away, drawing the curtains closed behind me. My heart pounded in my chest, a mixture of anger, sadness, and a twisted sense of satisfaction. I needed to explain how we had reached this point, how Emily and I had come to this tragic juncture. "My name is Michael Ross. I met Emily in college during my sophomore year. A mutual friend introduced us, and from the moment I laid eyes on her, I was captivated. Emily wasn't conventionally beautiful, but she was undeniably attractive, petite with striking green eyes and auburn hair that fell in waves to her shoulders. Her presence was magnetic, and I was instantly smitten. We started dating, and within weeks, we were inseparable. A month after we met, we made love for the first time, and it was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Emily was my world, and I couldn't get enough of her. Neither of us was particularly experienced, but we discovered each other with a passion that felt boundless. We were deeply in love, and nothing seemed impossible. After college, we got married and moved into our first home, a cozy apartment in the city. Emily pursued a career in real estate, while I landed a job in engineering. Our life together felt perfect. As our incomes grew, we bought our dream house and expanded our family. First came Ella, now 8 years old, and 2 years later, Max, who is 6. We adored our children and lived for each other, or so I thought. Reflecting on it now, I see the cracks that I missed, the subtle signs that something was wrong. But at the time, I was blissfully unaware, living in a world of absolute love and trust. It took a random twist of fate to shatter that illusion. It was a typical Thursday morning, just before noon, when my phone rang. I was in the middle of a staff meeting at work, and seeing the school's number flash on my screen immediately filled me with concern. I excused myself and answered the call, hoping it was nothing serious. "Mr. Ross, This is Nurse Kelly from Brookside Elementary. Your daughter Shelby isn't feeling well. She's running a high fever and seems to have the flu. She needs to be picked up as soon as possible. I tried to stay calm, though my mind was racing. I'm in a meeting right now. Can you call my wife, Emily? I already did, she replied, but I couldn't reach her. I tried her office, home phone, and cell, but there was no answer. That's why I'm calling you. Panic set in. Okay, I'll be there as soon as I can. Please keep Shelby comfortable until I arrive. Apologizing to my colleagues, I left the meeting abruptly and rushed to my car. The drive to Shelby's school felt like an eternity. When I finally arrived, Nurse Kelly greeted me with a sympathetic smile and led me to the nurse's office where Shelby lay on a small cot, looking pale and exhausted.
Shwatia.
Daddy's here, I whispered, scooping her up gently. She rested her head on my shoulder, too tired to respond. As we drove home, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked in our driveway, next to Emily's. My heart sank, and a sense of dread washed over me. I told myself it must be nothing, but a nagging suspicion took root in my mind. Stay in the car for a minute, Shelby, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I need to check something inside. I'll be right back. But Dad, I'm tired, she whined softly. I know, sweetheart. Just a minute, okay? I lied, hating myself for it. It was the first lie I had ever told my daughter. I entered the house quietly, my heart pounding. The kitchen and living room were empty, but then I heard it, a girlish laugh from upstairs. My blood ran cold. I knew that laugh too well. Emily. I crept up the stairs, each step a struggle against the fear and anger boiling inside me. The door to our bedroom was slightly ajar. I peeked inside and saw Emily, with her lover, Greg, our son's basketball coach, in our bed, entwined together. My world shattered in an instant. I backed away, feeling numb, and returned to the car. Let's go to Grandma's, Shelby, I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Why, Dad? I want to go home. Not today, sweetie. Grandma's house will be better for now. I drove off, my mind a storm of emotions. My perfect world had been irreparably torn apart. As I drove Shelby to my mother's house, my mind was in turmoil. The image of Emily and Greg in our bed was seared into my brain. I could barely focus on the road, my thoughts spiraling into anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. Shelby, thankfully, drifted off to sleep in the back seat, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. When we arrived at my mom's house, she opened the door with a warm smile that quickly turned to concern when she saw my face. Michael, what's wrong? It's a long story, Mom. Shelby isn't feeling well. Can you watch her for a few hours? I need to take care of something. Of course, she said, taking Shelby from my arms and carrying her inside. Take your time. I kissed Shelby's forehead and whispered, Daddy will be back soon, before heading back to my car. The drive back home was a blur. My mind raced with questions and scenarios, each one more painful than the last. I needed to see for myself, to understand the depth of Emily's betrayal. As I pulled into our driveway, the strange car was still there. My hands trembled as I opened the front door and walked into the house. It felt different now, tainted. I moved through the room silently, my ears straining for any sound. Upstairs, the soft murmur of voices guided me to our bedroom. I stood outside the door, my heart pounding. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open and stepped inside. Emily and Greg were still in bed, oblivious to my presence. The shock on their faces when they saw me was almost satisfying. Michael, Emily gasped, scrambling to cover herself. Greg sat up, his face a mask of guilt and fear. What the hell is this? I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. In our bed, Emily? How could you? She stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. Greg looked down, avoiding my gaze. The reality of their betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. I can't believe you, I said, my voice breaking. After everything we've been through, you threw it all away for this? Michael, I'm sorry, Emily whispered, tears streaming down her face. It just happened. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Greg tried to speak, but I cut him off. Get out. Both of you. Get out of my house. They hurriedly dressed and left, leaving me standing alone in the room that now felt foreign and cold. I sank to the floor, my mind racing. The life I thought I had, the love I believed in, was gone. As I sat there, the weight of what I had to do settled over me. This wasn't just about Emily and Greg. It was about reclaiming my life and protecting my children from the fallout of this betrayal. I wiped away my tears and stood up. The plan that had been forming in my mind solidified. I knew what I had to do next. I sat in the silence of my empty house, the enormity of Emily's betrayal washing over me in waves. Each pulse of anger, each pang of heartache, sharpened my resolve. I needed to reclaim my life, and that meant ensuring Emily and Greg faced the consequences of their actions. Revenge, cold and calculated, was the only path forward. First, I called my old college friend, Jake Turner. Jake was an expert in security systems and surveillance, skills that would be invaluable for my plan. When he picked up, I could barely keep the venom out of my voice as I explained what had happened. Mike, I'm so sorry, man, Jake said. I'll help you any way I can. What do you need? I need proof, Jake. Solid, undeniable proof. Can you help me set up cameras and mics around the house? Absolutely, he replied without hesitation. I've got some state-of-the-art gear that should do the trick. I'll bring everything over tomorrow. That night, sleep was impossible. My mind was a whirlpool of memories and painful realizations. How had I missed the signs? How had Emily become so adept at deception? I couldn't let these questions distract me. I had to stay focused. The next morning, Jake arrived with a duffel bag full of equipment. He didn't ask for details. He knew better. We got to work immediately, placing tiny, high-resolution cameras in strategic locations. The master bedroom, the kitchen, the living room. Each camera was carefully hidden, yet positioned to capture every angle. Jake also provided a small voice recorder that I slipped under the driver's seat of Emily's car. It would record her conversations, giving me insight into her plans and interactions with Greg. Everything is motion activated, Jake explained as we finished the setup. You'll get clear video and audio. Just make sure you check the recordings regularly. Thanks, Jake. I owe you one, I said, gripping his hand firmly. You don't owe me anything, Mike. Just take care of yourself. After Jake left, I sat down at my desk and began to draft the signs. Each word was chosen with care, designed to inflict maximum emotional impact. I printed large, bold photographs of Emily and Greg, capturing their most incriminating moments. It was painful to look at, but necessary for what I had planned. By the time evening rolled around, I was exhausted but determined. Emily came home, greeting me with a casual smile that made my blood boil. I forced myself to act normal, to play the part of the unsuspecting husband. Over the next few days, I monitored the recordings religiously. The evidence piled up, each new file adding fuel to my resolve. Emily and Greg's encounters were frequent and brazen, their conversations filled with sickening sweetness and deceit. Finally, I had everything I needed. The day of reckoning was set. I would expose their affair in the most public, humiliating way possible. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity and ensuring they could never hurt me, or anyone else again. As I went to bed that night, the plan fully formed in my mind. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Tomorrow, Emily and Greg would face the consequences of their betrayal, and I would start the process of healing, free from the lies that had poisoned my life for far too long. The following days were a blur of meticulous planning and quiet anticipation. I became a ghost in my own home, moving silently, observing, and waiting for the moments that would seal Emily's fate. Each morning, I left early, pretending to go to work, but in reality, I was setting the stage for the final act of our unraveling marriage. The surveillance equipment Jake had installed worked perfectly. I reviewed the footage every night, watching Emily and Greg's secret meetings unfold on the screen. Each interaction, each whispered endearment, was captured in crisp detail. The more I watched, the more resolute I became. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a mockery of everything I held dear. One afternoon, as I reviewed the latest footage, I caught a particularly damning conversation. Emily and Greg were lounging on our bed, discussing their plans for the future. My stomach churned as I listened. We'll figure it out, Greg said, his voice low and confident. Once Michael's out of the picture, we can be together openly. Emily sighed, a dreamy smile on her face. I know. It's just the kids. How do we explain this to Ella and Max? We'll find a way, Greg assured her. They'll understand eventually. And once we're settled, they'll see how happy we are together. I clenched my fists, the anger boiling within me. They spoke so casually about dismantling my life, our life, without a second thought for the devastation they were causing. It was the final push I needed. I knew it was time to set my plan into motion. The next day, while Emily was out, I gathered all the footage and transferred it to a secure drive. I compiled the most incriminating clips into a highlight reel, ensuring it was clear and irrefutable. I also printed the most damning photos, ready to be displayed for the world to see. I called Jake to update him. Everything's ready. I have all the proof I need. Good, he said. Remember, keep a cool head. This isn't just about getting even. It's about making sure they can't hurt you again. I know, I replied, feeling a strange calm wash over me. Thanks for everything, Jake. I couldn't have done this without you. That evening, Emily was unusually cheerful. She chatted about her day, made plans for the weekend, and even suggested we take the kids to the zoo. I played along, masking my anger with feigned interest. It was surreal, knowing what I knew, and still pretending everything was normal. After dinner, while Emily put the kids to bed, I slipped out to the garage. There, I placed the signs and photographs I had prepared into the trunk of my car, making sure they were ready for the morning. I felt a grim satisfaction as I envisioned the scene that would unfold. Later that night, I checked the recorder in Emily's car. As expected, there were several conversations with Greg, each one filled with promises and plans. I added the recordings to my growing collection of evidence. When I finally went to bed, Emily was already asleep. I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. It was necessary, I reminded myself. This was the only way to reclaim my life and protect my children from the toxic environment that Emily and Greg had created. Tomorrow, the facade would shatter, and with it, the last remnants of the life I had thought was perfect. It was time for the truth to come out, no matter how painful it might be. I closed my eyes, ready for the storm that was about to break. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling a mix of anxiety and grim determination. Emily was still asleep, her face serene, as if she had nothing to hide. I showered quietly and dressed, careful not to disturb her. Today was the day everything would change. I went downstairs and made breakfast for the kids, my actions mechanical, my mind focused on the plan. Ella and Max came bounding down the stairs, their laughter a painful reminder of what was at stake. I hugged them tightly, wishing I could shield them from the fallout that was about to hit. As we ate, Emily joined us, her mood bright and cheerful. She kissed me on the cheek, and I forced a smile, playing the part of the loving husband one last time. "Good morning, everyone. Any plans for today?" she asked, her voice filled with the usual morning cheer. "Just the usual," I replied casually. "Work, school, and then maybe a movie night?" "That sounds lovely," she said, beaming. "I'm showing a few houses today, but I should be home early." "Great," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "We'll be here." After breakfast, Emily left to drop the kids off at school, and I busied myself with final preparations. I checked the footage one last time, making sure everything was in order. The signs, the photographs, and the recordings were all ready. The stage was set. When Emily returned, she found me in the living room, working on my laptop. "Busy day?" she asked, glancing at the screen. "Yeah, just a few reports to finish," I said, keeping my tone light. "What about you?" "Same here," she replied. "I have a big showing this afternoon. Wish me luck." "Good luck," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm sure you'll do great." As she left for work, I felt a surge of anger. How easily she slipped into her role, deceiving everyone around her. But I couldn't let my emotions take over. I had to stay focused. The hours crawled by, each minute stretching endlessly. I went through the motions of work, my mind always returning to the plan. Finally, it was time. I packed the signs and photos into my car and drove to the meeting spot I had chosen, a public park where everyone could see. I placed the signs strategically, ensuring they were visible from the road. Each one detailed Emily and Greg's betrayal, accompanied by the incriminating photographs. It was a brutal, public display of their deceit. With everything in place, I drove back home, my heart pounding. Emily would be home soon, and the reality of what she had done would hit her like a tidal wave. I felt a mix of anticipation and dread, knowing that this confrontation would change our lives forever. When she pulled into the driveway, I watched from the window as her eyes widened in horror. She stepped out of the car, her face pale, and approached the signs, reading each one with mounting disbelief. The crowd of onlookers began to gather, whispering and pointing. I stepped outside, my expression cold and unyielding. Our eyes met, and in that moment, she knew. The facade was over. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Emily's face turned ashen as she read the signs and looked at the photographs displayed on our front lawn. The crowd of onlookers murmured, some pointing, others whispering to one another. She glanced back at me, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. The facade of our perfect life had shattered, and there was no hiding from the truth now. I stepped forward, my heart pounding, every step feeling like a battle against the emotional tempest within me. "Michael, what is this?" she stammered, her voice trembling. I took a deep breath, my expression cold and unyielding. "This is the truth, Emily. This is what you've done to our marriage, our family." Tears welled up in her eyes as she struggled to speak. "Please, can we talk about this inside?" "Inside?" I said, my voice rising. "Why? So you can spin more lies? So you can try to cover up what you've done?" "No, Emily, we're doing this out here, where everyone can see the truth." The neighbors edged closer, some with phones out, recording the spectacle. Emily's tears fell freely now, her facade crumbling. "Michael, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." "Yet you did," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "For months, you lied to me, betrayed me. You brought that man into our home, into our bed. You didn't just hurt me, Emily. You destroyed our family." The crowd was silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Emily covered her face with her hands, sobbing. "I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry." "It's too late for apologies," I said, my voice firm. "You made your choices, and now you have to face the consequences." Just then, a police car pulled up, lights flashing. An officer stepped out, looking at the scene with a mix of curiosity and concern. He approached us, glancing at the signs and then at me. "Sir, what's going on here?" "This is a personal matter," I replied, my tone measured. "But if you must know, my wife has been unfaithful, and this is my way of exposing her betrayal." The officer nodded slowly, his gaze shifting to Emily, who was still crying. "I understand you're upset, but this is a public disturbance. I'm going to have to ask you to take this down." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief. The message had been delivered. "All right, officer. I'll take it down, but the damage is done." As the officer supervised, I began to remove the signs and photographs, the crowd slowly dispersing. Emily stood to the side, her shoulders shaking with sobs. When the last sign was taken down, I turned to her, my voice softening just a fraction. "You need to pack your things and leave. I'll make arrangements for the kids." She nodded, her expression one of utter defeat. "Michael, Just go, Emily," I interrupted, turning away from her. "It's over." She walked back to the house, her steps heavy with the weight of her actions. I followed her inside, the house feeling strangely empty and cold. The execution had begun, and there was no turning back. This was the end of our life together, and the beginning of something new, whatever that might be. The house was eerily silent as Emily walked inside, her footsteps echoing off the walls. I followed her, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. The reality of what had just happened was sinking in, but there was still more to be done. I couldn't afford to let my guard down now. Emily headed upstairs to our bedroom, the place where her betrayal had taken root and flourished. She began packing her things, her movements slow and mechanical, as if she were in a trance. I stood in the doorway, watching her, feeling a strange mix of sadness and anger. "Michael," she said quietly, not looking up from her suitcase. "I know you hate me right now, and I understand why. But please, can we talk about this? For the sake of the kids?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's nothing left to talk about, Emily. You made your choices, and now we have to deal with the consequences." "But what about Ella and Max?" she pleaded, finally meeting my eyes. "How do we explain this to them? How do we make sure they're okay?" "We'll figure it out," I said, my tone cold. "But right now, you need to leave. I'll pick up the kids from my mom's and bring them home later. We'll tell them together, but you're not staying here tonight." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you or the kids." "But you did," I replied, my anger flaring up again. "You didn't just hurt me, Emily. You destroyed everything we built together. And for what? A fling with Greg? Was it worth it?" She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I turned away, unable to bear the sight of her tears. My heart ached, but I couldn't let her see that. I needed to stay strong, for myself and for the kids. As Emily continued packing, I went to the office and checked the recordings one last time. The evidence was irrefutable. Every lie, every betrayal was captured in crystal clear detail. I copied the files onto a flash drive, feeling a grim satisfaction as I did so. This was my insurance, my way of ensuring that Emily couldn't twist the truth or deny what she had done. When I returned to the bedroom, Emily was closing her suitcase. She looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy. "I'm ready to go." I nodded, my expression hard. "Good. I'll call you when it's time to talk to the kids. Until then, don't come back here." She picked up her suitcase and walked past me, her head bowed. I followed her downstairs and watched as she left, the door closing behind her with a finality that echoed through the empty house. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence wash over me. The deception had unraveled, leaving nothing but the stark reality of what was left. It was time to pick up the pieces and start rebuilding, one step at a time. With a heavy heart, I grabbed my keys and headed out to pick up Ella and Max. They deserved the truth, and it was up to me to make sure they got it. As I drove to my mom's house, I steeled myself for the difficult conversation ahead. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one that I hoped would eventually lead to healing and peace. The drive to my mom's house felt like it took forever. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to explain the situation to Ella and Max without causing them too much pain. They were innocent in all of this, and it wasn't fair that they had to suffer because of their mother's actions. When I arrived, my mom greeted me with a worried expression. "Michael, are you all right?" I forced a smile.
"I'm managing, Mum."
"Are the kids ready?" She nodded, giving me a hug. "They're inside playing. Just take it one step at a time." I thanked her and went inside to find Ella and Max. They ran to me, full of excitement and oblivious to the storm brewing in their lives. "Dad, Grandma let us bake cookies," Ella exclaimed, her face lighting up with joy. "That's great, sweetheart," I said, hugging them both tightly. "But we need to head home now. We have something important to talk about." Their faces fell a bit, sensing the seriousness in my voice. I ushered them into the car, and we drove home in silence, the weight of the impending conversation hanging over us. When we arrived, I sat them down in the living room, trying to find the right words. Kids, there's something I need to tell you. I began, my voice steady. Mom and I, well, we're going to be living apart for a while. Ella's eyes widened. Why, Dad? Did we do something wrong? No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong, I reassured her. This is between Mom and me. We're having some problems, and we think it's best if we take some time apart. Max, always more observant than his age suggested, looked at me with concern. Is it because of the man who came to our house? My heart ached. I hadn't realized they'd noticed anything. Yes, Max, it's because of that. But I want you both to know that we love you very much, and nothing will change that. Tears welled up in Ella's eyes. I don't want you and Mom to fight. I know, sweetie, I said, holding her close. But sometimes, grown-ups have to make tough decisions. We'll still be a family, just in a different way. Max hugged me tightly, his small frame shaking. Will Mom be okay? Yes, I promised. We'll all be okay. It's just going to take some time to adjust. After a long, emotional conversation, I finally got them settled into their rooms. As I stood in the hallway, the reality of what lay ahead hit me hard. This was just the beginning of a difficult journey. Later that evening, Emily called. Michael, can I come over to talk to the kids? I took a deep breath. Not tonight, Emily. They need time to process everything. We'll figure out a schedule for you to see them. Please, Michael, she pleaded. I need to see them. Tomorrow, I relented. We'll talk tomorrow. Hanging up the phone, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. The confrontation had happened, but it was far from over. There were still so many battles to fight, so many wounds to heal. But for now, I had to focus on the kids and helping them through this painful transition. As I lay in bed that night, the house felt emptier than ever. The echoes of our former life haunted me, but I knew I had to stay strong. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but I was determined to face it head-on, one step at a time. The house felt like a different place the next morning. The air was thick with the weight of yesterday's revelations. As I walked through the empty rooms, the memories of happier times clung to the walls like ghosts. It was as if the house itself mourned the loss of what we once had. I made breakfast for Ella and Max, who ate in silence, their usual chatter absent. Their eyes were puffy from crying, and my heart ached for them. I tried to engage them in conversation, but their responses were short and subdued. I knew it would take time for them to adjust to this new reality. After breakfast, I sat down with them in the living room. Today, we're going to try to have a normal day, I said, forcing a smile. We can go to the park, maybe get some ice cream. How does that sound? Ella nodded slowly, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Okay, Dad. Can we go to the big park with the swings? Of course, I replied, relieved to see a glimmer of her usual enthusiasm. Max, what about you? Can we get chocolate ice cream? He asked, his voice small. You bet, I said, ruffling his hair. Anything you want. We spent the day at the park, trying to find some semblance of normalcy. The kids played on the swings and slides, their laughter gradually returning. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. Watching them, I realized that they were stronger than I had given them credit for. They would get through this, and so would I. When we returned home, there was a message from Emily on the answering machine. She wanted to come by in the evening to see the kids. I felt a surge of anger, but pushed it down. This wasn't about me. It was about Ella and Max. Emily arrived just after dinner. The kids ran to her, hugging her tightly. She looked at me over their heads, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and gratitude. Thank you for letting me see them, she said softly. I nodded, keeping my distance. They need you. Just make sure you're honest with them. We spent the next hour in an uneasy truce, watching as Emily played with the kids. She tried to make things seem normal, but the tension was palpable. When it was time for her to leave, she hugged them again, promising to see them soon. After she left, I put the kids to bed, reading them their favorite stories. They clung to me, seeking comfort in the familiar routine. As they drifted off to sleep, I sat by their beds, watching them breathe, feeling a fierce protectiveness. I couldn't shield them from everything, but I could be there for them, every step of the way. I returned to the living room, the silence pressing down on me. I poured myself a drink, the first one since this whole ordeal began. As I sipped it, I thought about the future. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. I would do whatever it took to rebuild our lives. The aftermath of Emily's betrayal was like navigating through a storm, but I was determined to find calm waters. For Ella and Max, for myself, and even for Emily, we had to move forward, even if the path was strewn with the wreckage of what once was. Tomorrow would be a new day, and with it, the promise of healing and new beginnings. As I finished my drink, I felt a glimmer of hope. We would get through this, stronger and more resilient. And one day, the pain would fade, leaving behind only the lessons learned and the bonds that held us together. The next morning, the doorbell rang just as I was finishing breakfast with Ella and Max. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I felt a pang of apprehension as I walked to the door. When I opened it, Sherry stood there, her eyes swollen from crying, looking more fragile than I'd ever seen her. "Michael, can we talk?" she asked, her voice trembling. I glanced back at the kids, who were watching us with wide eyes. "Go upstairs and play for a while, okay?" I told them. They nodded and left, sensing the seriousness of the situation. I stepped aside, letting Sherry in. We went to the living room, where the memories of our confrontation still lingered. She sat down on the couch, clutching her hands together, her knuckles white. I remained standing, not ready to bridge the gap between us. "Michael," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know where to start. I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for, but I need you to understand how sorry I am." I stared at her, the anger and betrayal still raw in my heart. "Sherry, apologies don't change what you did. You tore our family apart." "I know," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want a chance to explain, to try and make things right, even if it's just a little." I sat down in the chair opposite her, keeping my distance. "Go ahead."
I'm listening.
She took a deep breath, struggling to compose herself. "I was lost, Michael. I felt like I was drowning in the routine of our lives. I didn't feel seen, and I know that's no excuse. I should have talked to you, but instead, I made the worst mistake of my life." "And Greg?" I asked, my voice cold. "What about him?" "He was there, offering me attention and making me feel desirable again. It was a lie, and I see that now. It was a temporary escape, but it cost me everything that mattered." I shook my head, the pain still fresh. "You had a choice, Sherry. You chose to betray me, to betray our family." She nodded, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "I know, I don't deserve anything from you, but I'm begging you to let me be a part of Ella and Max's lives. They need their mother, Michael. Please don't take them away from me." I looked at her, seeing the desperation and regret in her eyes. Despite everything, I couldn't deny the bond between a mother and her children. "I won't take them away from you, Sherry. They need you, but they also need stability. We'll work out a schedule that's best for them." "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, to be the mother they deserve." "There's no going back," I said firmly. "We have to move forward, for their sake. You'll have to prove to them, and to me, that you can be the mother they need." "I will," she promised, her eyes filled with determination. "I won't let them down." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. Finally, Sherry stood up, wiping her tears. "I'll leave now. Please tell Ella and Max that I love them, and I'll see them soon." "I will," I said, watching her walk to the door. As she left, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to heal, not as a couple, but as co-parents, united in our love for our children. As I went upstairs to check on Ella and Max, I knew that the road ahead would be challenging. But for their sake, I was willing to try. And that was a start. The days following Sherry's plea were a whirlwind of emotions and tough decisions. Each morning, I woke up to the quiet reality of our new life, a stark contrast to the chaos of recent events. The kids needed stability, and it was up to me to provide that. Sherry and I had agreed to meet with a family counselor to help navigate the complexities of our situation. Our first session was scheduled for the following week, and I hoped it would provide some clarity. Until then, I had to keep moving forward, one step at a time. One evening, after putting Ella and Max to bed, I sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. The house was quiet, the silence almost comforting. I pulled out the paperwork I had prepared with my lawyer: divorce documents, custody agreements, financial plans. Each page represented a piece of the life we had built together, now being carefully dismantled. I reviewed the documents, making sure everything was in order. The divorce would be straightforward, but the custody arrangement required careful consideration. I wanted to ensure that Ella and Max had ample time with both of us, even if Sherry and I could no longer be together. The phone rang, breaking the silence. It was Sherry. "Michael, can we talk?" I sighed, feeling the weight of the conversation ahead. "Sure, Sherry. What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about moving forward. I want to do what's best for the kids, and I'm willing to cooperate fully with the custody arrangements." "That's good to hear," I replied. "We need to make sure they feel secure and loved, no matter what." "I know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've found a place nearby, so I can be close to them. It's small, but it's enough for now." "That's a start," I said, feeling a glimmer of relief. "We'll work out a schedule that gives them plenty of time with both of us." "Thank you, Michael," she whispered, "for giving me a chance to make things right, at least for them." "We're doing this for them, Sherry," I said firmly. "They deserve the best we can give them." The next day, I met with my lawyer to finalize the documents. We reviewed the custody agreement, making sure it was fair and balanced. Sherry would have the kids every other weekend and one evening a week. Holidays and vacations would be split equally. It was a plan that prioritized the children's well-being, giving them stability amidst the upheaval. That evening, after the kids were asleep, I sat on the porch, reflecting on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the confrontation, Sherry's plea. It all felt like a lifetime compressed into a few short weeks. But now, with the final decisions made, I felt a sense of closure. The road ahead would still be difficult, but at least we had a plan. Sherry and I would never be the same, but we could find a way to coexist for the sake of our children. It wasn't the life I had envisioned, but it was the best path forward. As I sat there, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky, I felt a tentative sense of hope. The past was behind us, and the future, though uncertain, held the promise of healing and new beginnings. For Ella and Max, for myself, and even for Sherry, we would find a way to move forward. And that was enough for now. In the weeks that followed, the pieces of our shattered lives slowly began to fall into place. The routine of daily life returned, offering a semblance of normalcy that we all desperately needed. Ella and Max adapted better than I had hoped, their resilience a constant source of inspiration for me. Sherry moved into her new apartment, a modest but comfortable space just a few blocks away. The proximity made it easier for the kids to transition between homes, and I was grateful for that. We met with the family counselor, who helped us establish a cooperative parenting plan that prioritized Ella and Max's well-being above all else. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some old photos, Ella walked into the room. "What are you doing, Dad?" she asked, curiosity sparkling in her eyes. "Just looking at some old pictures," I replied, smiling. "Want to join me?" She nodded eagerly, and we spent the next hour going through the albums, laughing at the memories and sharing stories. It was a poignant reminder of the good times we'd had, and it helped reinforce my determination to create new, happy memories for my children. On weekends, I started taking Ella and Max on little adventures, trips to the zoo, hiking trails, and even a weekend camping trip. These outings became our way of bonding and healing. The joy on their faces as we explored the world together was priceless, and it filled the void left by the recent turmoil. Meanwhile, Sherry was making her own efforts to rebuild her relationship with the kids. She took them on outings, helped with their school projects, and made sure to be present for all their important events. It wasn't easy, but I could see she was trying, and the kids responded positively to her efforts. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I found myself alone in the living room, reflecting on the changes. The anger and bitterness that had once consumed me had begun to fade, replaced by a cautious optimism. Life was far from perfect, but it was moving forward. I reached out to a few old friends, reestablishing connections that had been neglected over the years. It felt good to reconnect, to remind myself that there was a world beyond the confines of my broken marriage. I even joined a local running club, finding solace in the rhythm of my footsteps and the camaraderie of the group. One Saturday, as I was jogging with the club, I struck up a conversation with a woman named Lisa. She was kind, with a warm smile and an easy laugh. We talked about everything and nothing, and it felt surprisingly natural. For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope for the future. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, our new life began to take shape. Sherry and I communicated more openly about the kids, coordinating schedules and attending school events together. We weren't friends, but we were civil, and that was a start. Ella and Max continued to thrive, their laughter a constant reminder of what truly mattered. They had come through the storm stronger, and I knew I had to do the same. The past would always be a part of us, but it didn't have to define our future. One evening, as I tucked the kids into bed, Max looked up at me with sleepy eyes. "Dad, are we going to be okay?" I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Yes, buddy, we're going to be just fine." As I left their room and turned off the light, I felt a sense of peace. Moving on wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about embracing the present and looking forward to the future. For Ella, Max, and myself, that future was filled with promise. And that was more than enough.